Hi, cultural geography students. This is week 13, and I'm going to give you a mini lesson today to go along with the documentary that you watched on Monday or Tuesday of this week when it was first available. I know it was a long documentary, and there were a lot of things in it that you could use to refer to our textbook and the information there about corporations and semi-periphery countries, periphery countries, the core countries, levels of development, all of the things that Chapter 10 refers to in the development chapter in our class. So I wanted to address today in this mini lecture with you a couple of issues that I didn't bring to light in week 12, and the documentary might not have focused on as well as it could have. So this will be the last little bit of discussion that we have about Chapter 10, which is about development. And next week, we're going to focus mainly on agriculture's role. So I've got it listed kind of at the end here because that's going to be a segue into what we're going to talk about over the next 2 weeks. We're going to talk about agriculture first and then industrialization. Okay. So, development in general, development of infrastructure, which if you remember this word from probably chapter 4, I don't remember really when we first covered it, but it was early on in the semester, and we watched a short video together of like a hillside in Brazil, and we looked at like the roads and the lack of sanitation, for instance, and how that contributed negatively to human health conditions. So in developed nations, infrastructure is really high level. There's a lot of availability of clean water resources. Sanitation resources are highly developed. We have things like an electrical grid or other utilities that can bring services to us where we are. I live way out in the boonies, and yet I have internet service out here. I might have been complaining to you about it because it takes me sometimes too long to be able to upload some of these videos so that you can see them. And also, if you're my face-to-face student, during the Blackboard Collaborate sessions, you've noticed that my video, sometimes I don't even try the video because my video will be there for like 2 seconds and then it'll drop because it says my internet service is too slow. Well, that internet service, even though I choose to live out in the boonies, it's still part of the infrastructure that enables me to do my job and me to have a full spectrum of life. We're in an industrialized core nation, and in those nations where governments do not operate based on that clan mentality like we looked at last week, one of the videos that didn't have me in it talked about the clan mentality in governments in a lot of the periphery nations, and even to some extent the semi-periphery nations. Human development, which enables you and me, we have human development issues such as long life expectancy, such as health care opportunities, wellness care is maybe a term that's better suited for what we have in the United States. Also, high levels of education. We require that regardless of whether you're male or female, whatever your cultural identity is, whatever your religious affiliation is, we require that you have a certain education level that is a high school diploma minimum. I know not everybody in our nation gets a high school diploma. However, we certainly as a nation on the macro scale encourage as many people in the population to get a high school diploma as possible. Sometimes we don't catch it until it's GED days, excuse me. Some people just have their GED instead of going through a regular high school experience, but that's the level of education, the minimum level of education that in a developed nation or a core nation or a high income nation, however you want to classify the United States, that's the level of education that we have, and that education enables us to make better decisions and to critique our government. Also, our system enables us the freedom to critique our government without oppression, without potential death or imprisonment. A lot of times in the world where cronyism or clan mentality is the foundation of how do people get jobs within the government, if an average citizen stood up to voice opinion, or voice opposition is the word that I should have said there, many times that citizen puts his or her life at risk. And normally it would be a he, because patriarchy typically puts males in those public roles in society and females in domestic roles in society, household roles. Very often in those periphery nations, education is not even offered to females, especially when that female has begun her menstrual cycle, because the role of females in society typically is a baby producer, a wife, a domestic function, and a baby producer. So at the time that females begin their menstruation, many places around the world arrange marriages for those individuals because that's their social function. So education is often limited to that age, or maybe you never even go at all, because why should you? That's not your role in society. That's not your culture. Many of you in your reaction papers last week were fascinated by the fact that religion plays such a strong role in the lives of people in the most impoverished nations. And many of you in your reaction paper said, why would that be? Why would religion be an impedance to progress or to human development? And religion itself, it's not so much that any one religion would teach its followers that you shouldn't try to advance, you shouldn't try to achieve creature comforts or to improve life conditions. It's not so much that a religion teaches its followers those things. Instead, most religions offer explanations that this realm, this worldly realm where you and I are existing now, that this is not supposed to be the permanent realm, and therefore whatever happens here, suffering-wise or luxury, enjoyment-wise, whatever happens here is temporary, and we have no control over it, because religion typically has the idea that there is, in monotheistic or polytheistic religions anyways, there is like an overarching controlling group of gods, or a monotheistic God, or even in animistic religions, there is a life force or powers greater than just you and me that are destined to do or destined to create a pathway for you and me and the rest of humanity that we really don't have control over. And so why would you try to exert control over that to improve lives? There's a term for this kind of mentality about not seeing the need for education and how it could improve social conditions, for not seeing the need, I don't have healthcare here, but not seeing the need for wellness care, or understanding that certain things can be avoided, early death can be avoided with intervention of medicine, the role of religion in keeping people in, let me say, a backward mindset about their agency. We have this concept called human agency, where I can be an active participant in what my life trajectory is, rather than simply a puppet with a puppet master, and my life is going to end up the way it's going to end up anyway. So you have this concept of human agency, but also in very impoverished nations, you have another concept that is very, very present, if not pandemically present. Let me use that word that's going to be part of our vocabulary much more frequently than in the past as we move forward. But fatalism is a mental condition, so to speak, not in the psychological sense, but fatalism is the idea that, well, first of all, here's the root word fatal. What does that mean? It means death. And it's kind of a hopelessness, a general hopelessness about your human agency. It's maybe the notion that this doesn't even exist, you have no control over your life's outcomes. You cannot affect your children's life outcomes. You can't affect your the rest of your family's life outcomes, let alone what the structure and role of the government is in your nation, let alone standing up for other human rights against child marriage, for instance, or against female circumcision that happens in many of these countries, or against the environmental rape that happens when these big corporations come in, like the copper mines that we saw in this last video, the documentary that we started this week with. So these issues, social issues, governmental issues, cultural issues that I have on the board here, these concepts, these overarching physical and mental well-being concepts are absent to a great extent in the periphery countries that suffer so much impoverished condition. In your textbook in chapter 10, and then also in one of the videos at the end of week 12, we talked about agriculture and the role of agriculture. We've talked about that for a couple weeks now, certainly social stratification and the vast differences between us and them, you and me, comes with that surplus that agriculture produces. But because agriculture relies on the land so much, as noted in the videos last week, the availability or the usability of your land in your region begins to be attractive or not attractive to these big corporations, to these conglomerates that want to come in and mass produce things. So you also, or we will see in next week's beginning video, you will see kind of people are at odds with each other. That's what I mean by this fist pumping kind of motion I'm making. People who want to subsist through agriculture, whose culture has regularly taught them and encouraged them to not to focus on the surplus that agriculture can produce for them, but subsistence for themselves, their families, their villages. So those folks with that cultural mindset are often at odds and oppressed, sometimes aggressively so, not just from a governmental law kind of aspect. And they can be displaced, just like gentrification in a city can displace the people who need the property the most and greatly disadvantage those people in the displacement. That's the same thing that you see happening in the world where land is arable and desirable. People who had lived on it and relied on it for centuries are displaced with nowhere to go, with no cultural background to understand how to exist in an urban area. They flow to urban areas in order to try to find resources, to try to rely on infrastructure, but a city is only as big as as it can be built. So in other words, if there's only 10,000 housing units and 40,000 groups that need housing, then we've got a lot of homelessness, we've got a lot of unemployment, we've got a lot of food shortages, we have a lot of lack of infrastructure like sanitation or clean water resources, and we see that vast difference between wealth and poverty really explode when those kinds of lifestyles, the traditional agrarian lifestyle is overtaken by these conglomerates that really want to focus on this massive industrialized agriculture. So next week and the week after, that's what the topics are going to be about. Still under the heading of not just human development, but development in general, economic development. And wealth versus poverty, but we're going to focus on agriculture and industrialization, and that will round out the semester for us this year for cultural geography class. So please be sure that you pay attention to those reaction paper opportunities that are still left. Some of you don't need them. Some of you have already earned 10 out of 10 reaction papers. That means you got 100%, so way to go. If you've already done that, then you don't need to complete any more reaction papers, but those those of you who haven't, there's one due every Saturday between now and when the final exam is due, which is going to be, I think, don't hold me fast to this, but I think May 12th is the day that I have to cut off that last exam, so I have time to grade them and post grades when I'm required to do so by the deadline that my boss gives me. So we will have as many reaction papers as there are Saturdays between now and then. So please do those if you need them. The quizzes also, do as well as you can on the quizzes, because I'm going to I'll drop at least 2. Some of you might have already seen that I dropped those from your record, but I'll drop 3 if we're able to have 13 quizzes, or 4 if we're able to have 14 quizzes. So don't skip those quizzes. Do as well as you can, and that'll help boost grades. And look for another extra credit opportunity that I'm going to post, where I'm going to ask you for some pointers and for some creativity on your part. So please enjoy your weekend. I hope we're not in a rain out all weekend, and I'll see you again next week for some continuing discussion in our cultural geography topics. Bye.